Hey, welcome to Open House with Jesse Meadow. I'm your host, Jesse Meadow. We're going to have a great show for you this week. I hope you had a nice break over the Thanksgiving holiday and got to spend some time with some relatives, whether virtually or in person. This year has the unique holiday. We do have Director of Enrollment Management, Lisa Pelrine, with us today. She's from the Chapel Hill-Chauncy Hall School up in Waltham, Massachusetts. So without further ado, let's bring them on and get introduced. Hey, there's Chris Mitchell. He's with us as usual. Let me throw Lisa up there. Hey, Lisa, how are you?
Hi, guys. I'm good. How are you?
Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day. I know you're in the middle of mid-year enrollment season, so it seems to be going well for you. That's great.
Yep.
So we'll get right to it, without wasting too much time. Let us know a little bit about yourself. How long you've been in admissions, enrollment management. What do you like about the role? And how did you get up to Massachusetts? Or maybe you've always been up there. I don't know.
Yeah. So I've been at Chapel Hill-Chauncy Hall School for 19 years, which is outrageous, thinking about how quickly these years have gone by. I'm actually from Massachusetts and grew up in the area, and
Nice.
and I actually attended Bentley University, which is literally right around the corner from CHCH. And so I didn't know much about the school at the time while I was in college. But when I graduated, I actually did recruiting for a couple of years for software engineers. And then I met the prior director. We worked out at the same gym, and she told me about the school and had an admissions opening. And so I applied, and 19 years later, I'm still there. When I first began, I was a dorm parent also for 10 years. I lived on campus with first the upper class dorm, and then I moved to the 9th and 10th grade girls dorm. So I had experience with that, and I did some coaching for softball and basketball. So, in boarding school, you do a little bit of everything.
Yeah, triple threat.
Yeah. And I had the opportunity to become the director within a couple of years of beginning at CHCH. So with my background in business management and marketing and doing the recruiting, I've always been a people person and loved the business aspect of it. But I also really love working with teenagers, not teaching them, but just working with them and being a mentor. So when I went to go interview at CHCH, it just really felt like the perfect bridge for kind of my background and my experience. And so I've been fortunate enough to be in such a great place for so long and being able to grow both professionally and personally as well.
God, you've had to see so many changes,
Oh,
whether it be the area or the school itself.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Mhm.
I actually went from admissions to student life. So, I dealt with the kids as well.
Yep.
And I gotta say, I loved interacting with the kids. I love planning events for them, but that business side of things, especially when you add in the international component, it's
Yep.
just such a unique role
Mhm.
to have in an industry. So, I definitely feel you on that. So
Yeah,
tell us
definitely.
a little bit about CHCH, maybe its background, some things that draw, yourself to the school, or perhaps things, for families as well might be the same.
Yeah, so it has this really cool history. So CHCH is actually comprised of 3 schools. So Chapel Hill was an all-girls school, actually, where we're located in Waltham, founded in the 1800s. And Chauncey Hall was an all-boys school, and they were in downtown Boston. And then there was a third school, the Huntington School for Boys, and they all merged in the 1970s and moved to the Chapel Hill campus in Waltham. So it's a beautiful campus tucked away in a busy city of Waltham, but it's very quiet and peaceful. I was shocked when I went for my interview and saw this beautiful pond with a waterfall in the middle of campus, just a lot of green space, a lot of really old buildings, and a lot of history. So it's really got this unique perspective of a day in boarding school in 15 minutes outside of Boston, which is really unique, and we're very fortunate to be where we are. So we're grades 9 through 12. We also offer a postgraduate program, and we're small. We're 180 students total, co-ed, and we have, on a typical year, about 60% day and 40% boarding, with about 25% international students coming from anywhere from 13 to 15 different countries each year. Our motto is we teach the way students learn. So we're a college prep school, but our approach to teaching and learning is really multifaceted, that, students have really a lot of potential, but when they're taught in kind of that traditional mold of a public school, they really don't reach their full potential. So what I love most about CHCH is just kind of the transformation that I've seen so many students go through over their time at CHCH. They're very creative students, think outside the box, very hands-on, interpersonal learners. And our teachers just do such a great job, like many, many small boarding schools, just really getting to know their students and their personalities and their strengths and weaknesses and how they work best. And so it's not, by any means that our students are limited. They have unlimited potential, and kind of to see that growth happen has just been so rewarding for me personally, just knowing their journey and where they've been, and just seeing them being able to continue their progress and just do great things has been really, really awesome for me throughout my time at CHCH.
Yeah, that's great. It sounds like a quaint but new age place. You get the old buildings and the history, and you're nearby big cities, but you still get to experience all the new innovative ways that we educate kids. So that's great.
Yeah, and I'm also part of the Small Boarding School Association. I'm part of their board, and I'm the conference chair. So it's been really, really great just kind of bringing my experience to that organization as well. And I think small boarding schools are so unique and we have our own challenges and so many strengths that we're able to bring to our students. But it's really been great to kind of collaborate with that group, and just kind of especially during these times, to really being able to share different things with them too. So.
Small boarding schools, I mean, even large boarding schools to a certain extent, depending on how reliant you are on that boarding tuition. This is the time where people need to band together and try to figure this thing out in order to survive as a group. So, kudos to you and all the work that you're putting in with that association. I'm sure helping many other schools as well. So along those lines, we got to talking, we find out some really innovative ideas and different ways that you've changed how you guys do open houses and tours, and then also a little bit about retention. So, I want to get into those kind of three subjects, and hopefully we don't digress too much from those, but it is a conversation that we'll have. But tell us, on the open house front, how did this come about? How did this start? And then tell us, a tidbit about how you've revamped and rethought your open houses.
Yeah, I think each year comes with its sets of challenges and just different things you're dealing with. But I would say the year of 2020, like everyone, has certainly been unique and has forced us to really rethink about enrollment and our jobs, and you can't do everything the same way you've done, and you also can't just take what you've done and transfer that to a virtual experience, right? It's not the same. And so while many of us just want to do that, we really had to take a step back and really reevaluate, what we could recreate, or just kind of think about new ideas and stuff like that. So for us, we're unique where we get half of our students come to us from public school, and then half come to us from feeder schools. So I think it's important to really think about your different constituent groups and their needs, especially with public school families now, either fully remote or in a hybrid model. How has that changed what they're experiencing? And I think for independent schools, this is a great opportunity for us to really get out there and market our great programs and what we're able to do for our students. And so along the way, we were making sure not only catering to the needs of the day students, the boarding students, but also those coming from public school versus feeder schools who are already used to being in a small, intimate environment where their teachers already get to know them and they're very self-aware of who they are as learners. And so that kind of was the baseline for our approach for our fall recruitment and what we wanted to do. So before our open houses, typically we have 2 in the fall on campus, 1 in mid-October and 1 in early November. And we have, what we usually do is start everyone off together, and then we had 2 separate agendas for the students and parents to experience CHCH. So the students would actually go off on a tour with other students, and then they would actually see or get to choose a couple mini classes that they would want to see. So they're actually in the classroom with CHCH teachers, maybe doing an art lesson or an English class or a science experiment, while parents kind of did their own Q&A and they're much more into that type of interaction. So before we led up to having to recreate those events, what we did was a series of webinars So depending on where you're coming from, whether it's public school, a Montessori school, another boarding school, or an independent school, we had several different webinars we did at night at 7 p.m., just kind of an hour, an intro to CHCH. And then we had parents and students from those specific schools as part of a panel. So that way parents could hear directly from those families about their transition from their school to CHCH. So that was really, to build that base and to give them that foundation about who we are. And then, obviously we couldn't have the big crowds on campus for our typical open house. So we were like, all right, obviously we have to do one virtual one. That's kind of a given. But we need to think about something that's outside the box, that's something people will remember. They need to get off their couches and maybe get out for an afternoon. And so our director of communications, I think we all have little kids, so we're all getting things in the mail, like do this virtually or come through this drive-through at the zoo, right? And we're like, oh, drive-through. That sounds like a cool idea, right? Like, how can we transfer that to an open house? And Matt is amazing. He came to us from the film and production industry, so he's really great at making videos and things like that. So what we actually did was we created a drive-through open house. And so we came up with 7 different stops throughout campus. And we're fortunate enough where we have kind of a really nice path that people could drive through with different stops. And so at each stop, people would check in. They would have a map of campus, and then they would have QR codes at each stop. And so, for example, the first stop was our brand new visual and performing arts space. So they would click on the QR code, and then open would be a 45-second to 1-minute video. It's important not for it to be too long to lose their attention.
Right.
Be a welcome from either a student or maybe from our director of visual arts talking about that program. And then it would have videos highlighting what happens in that space. So while they couldn't go in the building, they could actually experience what happens in that building. And so at each stop, there would be either a teacher or a student along the path, another QR code in case they wanted to scan that. So that way they could actually see some people on campus and interact with us at a safe distance, but also get to experience the campus in a different way. And then we were promoting our then virtual open house. So that way, again, that was everything we do has a purpose to then push another event for us. And so families loved it. They were like, oh my God, no other school's doing this. One family's like, I feel like I'm at Disney World, just kind of like on the path going through. So it was a great turnout. We lucked out with the weather, and families came like as a whole family. They brought their dogs in the car. Like, it was just really cool that it was like the whole family enjoying the experience together. So yeah, we got a lot of great feedback from that. A lot of families were like, wow, you're the school that did the drive-through open house. Like, it was so creative and innovative. And so again, that was something that we wanted to kind of do to stand out in the process, that, as they're going through and applying, like, oh yeah, that's the school that did that really cool event on campus. So so it actually went so well. We added a second drive-through, which was great because, again, all the videos are done. It's all you have to do is really just get volunteers to come on campus. We had our school mascot is we're the Chargers, so we had Chargy. So we had one of our students at the last stop with our head of school handing out a bag of just little CHCH stuff and travel pieces and just information for all of our events. So so we just made it as fun as possible, and it was very laid back, nothing too formal. So it worked out really, really well.
That's really inventive. I mean, that's a great draw. And I definitely think that in the admissions process, the application process, you will definitely stand out, at least for now, until everyone sees this video and catches on and starts implementing it at their schools. You'll stand out for sure. And I particularly like, how you individualize the content. If you're from a Montessori school, you send the parents here, you send the students there. Not exactly the same thing, but we did orientations at our old school, and we used to do them as a big group. And then we started to separate them, and we had a parents Q&A with administrators, and then we had the kids doing things with our student ambassadors, and they were kind of getting, asking questions that they feel more comfortable talking to kids about, and, going through the motions of, where things are. And it really helps. I mean, as far as an understanding of who you guys are, what you offer. And it really individualizes that word of mouth component. When you're talking to families or when you're talking to students that had a similar experience coming from and the transition, how did that work? I mean, obviously that's the most nerve-wracking point for students and sometimes parents too, is that transition. What is that going to work? Is this the best decision? And the first few weeks of trying to figure that out. And if you have a better understanding from someone that came from the same situation as you have a lot more comfortability with that transition. So that's really good.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Just curious. I mean, obviously you have a decent sized population of international students. International travel has been complicated with the whole COVID situation. That doesn't look to be changing, at least for the next few months. And so how have you kept up that recruitment, virtual open houses, but has there been other things that you found have worked? How is it how have you navigated this space, which you have a unique perspective because you both handle a day population, also feeder schools in the local community, but you also have an international population. Exactly. So I'm wondering how you kind of approach that front.
Yeah, I would say like many schools, that's been the most challenging, I think, of all, is that just the international landscape, the unknown. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to open our boarding program as of yet. And numbers in Massachusetts and Waltham in particular, like many areas continue to increase, and it's a scary time for many of us. So we've paused our boarding program. We're hoping to reopen after spring break, but we've continued with virtual, with remote learning, and both synchronous and asynchronous, and really just doing extra for our boarding students and our international students. Still continuing with evening study halls and dorm meetings and just community activities and assemblies and things like that. So, I think not only the recruitment part, but also the retention of your current students. So in lieu of being able to travel, what I've been doing, what's been nice about the whole virtual thing, right? Trying to look at the silver lining is that we are able to reach a broader audience when we are doing our events, because they can just tune in and join us for these virtual events. So I remember for our revisit days, we had one of our newest students, Mary from Uganda. She actually joined all 7 of our revisit day events virtually. She wouldn't have been able to do that otherwise. So, it has had its benefits. But I think, as I mentioned before, just the collaboration with other schools is super important at this time, right? We're all in it together. We're all unique schools, and we all serve a wide variety of students. And I think to make sure that we're collaborating, so I'm actually partnering with a group of schools that we usually travel together, and we're actually going to be doing different virtual events, but we actually came up with something that we're going to do it more like a podcast and a conversation, rather than just a typical slideshow where they've probably seen 20, 30, 40 of these with consultants and agents. So again, just trying to think of unique ways that you can stand out as a group of schools, while still communicating about your culture and your community and the programs you have, but in unique and innovative ways. So our first one that we're going to be focusing on is the Mexican market, and then move on to, Europe and Vietnam and some of those other places that we all have contacts, and sharing our contacts and making sure that we're collaborating with one another. So yeah, Chris, I agree. It's kind of the unknown, right? We're all wondering what this is going to do for us. Our landscape, our day population has really boomed, and especially from public school, and having students looking at us earlier in the process. Sometimes we don't get applicants from public school till sophomore, junior year, until like their high school option's just not the right fit for them. As we were just getting on, Jesse mentioned mid-years. For us, we've always taken mid-year students if we have the space. Our theory is, or kind of the way of thinking is, if a student's just not flourishing in their current environment and just not doing well, and we have the space, why not have them come mid-year and really transition and really build those foundational skills before they kind of undo any progress that they've made. So we've always had great success with having mid-year students, and I just enrolled 3 within the past week, all coming to us from public schools, just not happy with the remote option. So
yeah, of course.
Well, that's been good to help balance and offset the international numbers. As we're actually going through our 5-year strategic plan, creating a new one, and working with the board, we do recognize that really rebuilding both the domestic boarding and international boarding program is going to take some work. And I think just being realistic about it, that it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a process over the next few years.
I always find international recruitment very interesting. Jesse and I have a lot of conversations around this. He was traveling the world for half a dozen years, it seemed like. If you look 10 years ago, the markets that were areas where our domestic schools would go and get students has now changed 10 years later. And so where do you see this market in 5-10 years? Where are the emerging markets of students that are looking towards the U.S. for education, not only because they feel like it gives them opportunities, but also economically they're able to afford it? A lot of markets now that we've been going to, seem to be hitting their own economic issues. So just kind of where do you see this going? I mean, I'm sure you guys are talking about it now as well as other schools, but just kind of get your thoughts on that.
I wish I had the crystal ball to kind of see in the future what how all this will end up. But I know Vietnam is kind of that next emerging market. It already has been for us. But there's a lot of industrial companies going there. There's a lot of economic growth. And so I think Vietnam is definitely one to watch. I think, there's a lot of, students, their English is really at a level where I think when they come to us, whether it's a freshman or sometimes we have juniors coming to us from Vietnam, they've been really, really great additions to our community, I think culturally, and with language and just kind of wanting to jump right in. So I would say Vietnam is kind of a market that we've been watching, and a lot of just attending different webinars and things, because I think that's a great question, Chris. And I think it's a question that many people have. I would say that's kind of the one to look at and pay attention to right now.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, because I think that's kind of where a lot of people's heads needs to be from a standpoint of, we've had a lot of conversations even on this show about kind of what is the challenges presented to independent schools in the next 5-10 years, from tuition costs to emerging markets or markets that weren't there before, obviously battling a lot of different issues on that front. But yeah, I think it's something that we obviously need to continue to have conversations, because, Jesse and I are products of independent schools, and we see the value. And of course, that culture of having these type of students is important, especially, given the tradition of some of these institutions. So it's good that yourself and others are thinking about it, because I think this decade, and this is just my opinion, is really going to be a decade of reflection for this industry. I think because there's a lot of things that we're going to have to cross. And so, it's always interesting to get your perspective and others on this.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I think you're right on with that. I think that, again, it's going to be the biggest challenge. And, things we're thinking about too is there's the backlog of visas and appointments, and even getting kids here for next September, right? It's not even 5-10 years out. It's, even the kids we have enrolled, how do we get them back to our campuses?
What are their embassy schedules? In their home countries.
Yeah. And it's
independent schools, it's colleges and universities, and everybody fighting for those appointments. So it's going to be really interesting how this all unfolds over the next 6 to 9 months, for sure.
Yeah, and it's not even having to navigate the economic situation. It's also the geopolitical situations you have to navigate too. And so it's definitely going to be interesting.
Yeah, definitely Vietnam. I have to second. One of my best trips I've ever taken. The culture there, the kids that we got from there,
amazing. Yeah,
I mean, the best kids. They come for the right reasons. They're focused. They're big contributors to the community. And when you're talking about these different, open houses and the podcast, like you're saying, kind of have a live stream with them. I almost wonder if you're able to mix. It might take some time, but able to mix some of that uniqueness that you've had for your tours on the day market. Are they coming from Montessori schools? Are they coming from a feeder school? Are they coming from a public school? Maybe are they coming from Asia? Are they coming from Europe? Are they coming from Africa? Are they coming from, South America, Central America? And maybe tailor those a little bit like that, because at the end of the day, it'll be nice to get back to traveling. Obviously, nothing replaces face-to-face time and, getting to know and build relationships with either the agents or the families, alumni that are there. But at the same time, I've been saying this on almost every show, this virtual component is not going to go anywhere. Like you were saying, you're able to reach so many more people and more families than you normally would. we might get back to travel, but you're still going to have the virtual component. So how can we individualize those, international recruitment efforts by putting in some, regional specific information, or maybe even having students talk about their experiences that came from that region.
100%.
Do you guys have anything like that now?
Yeah, and I think each region has some things that they're looking for, right? The Mexican market and the moms in Mexico, right? They want the safety of their student and just kind of that they're going to be taken care of. Whereas some cultures are just really focused on the college list. So I think you're 100% right, Jesse, that really tailoring each podcast and event that we do to the culture and where we're recruiting from, and really utilizing our current families or our parents and alums in that process, I think is key. Right now we have, we started this a few years ago, is the Chinese Parent Guardian Association. So we call it the CPA. But I think, again, just kind of going to retention and recruitment is, how can we use our current families to help with both and make sure that, all of our families, whether they're here in the US or abroad, feel like part of our school community. And so that's just one example that we started that. And what our director of college counseling actually does for all international families is that she has virtual appointments with them and we'll have the student right there with her and really tackling the college counseling process with the families virtually. So we're really involving the parents and the consultant, whoever's involved with that student. So I think that's important. But we're also having monthly meetings with our international families, with the administrative team, and making sure that they're all aware of what's going on at the school and what we've been doing and kind of the challenges that we're faced with COVID-19 and just how we can best support their students. Is there more we can be doing for them? So for example, those evening study halls, the different things that, they can join and do. So, we've really, since last March when we had to go virtual, really have shifted and pivoted, our communication too with those families just to make sure that they're involved. And then we do it with all of our domestic boarders as well. And then we've had it with our day families as well. So again, looking at your different constituent groups and really making sure that we have open communication in that dialogue with them as well. So so I think both in the recruitment piece as well as the retention piece, we've been doing a lot of work with all of our families with that. You can't just assume they're happy. Right. We send out surveys throughout the year to our current families just to take a pulse on how things are going, both from an academic and kind of that co-curricular programmatic points of view as well, just to make sure that families are getting what they need, and then that way they can express their concerns or things we're doing really well to make sure that we have a pulse on how things are going.
Yeah, that's a good point. Nice transition too. When you talk about international students and you talk about day students, retention, obviously different angles, but at the same time equally as important. What are some things? I know we've talked about some interesting things that you guys do, some initiatives and programs that you have in place for retention. Tell us a little bit about those, how they might have come about. Maybe some, how long they've been in place and what you've seen. As far as the successes and learning.
Yeah, I think every year retention is such an important topic and part of the enrollment management process, right? Your current customers are your most important that you want to focus on, and that word of mouth, right? The word of mouth marketing is one of the biggest ways we get our families. And so over the years, we've always tried to improve that process and make sure that our retention numbers are where we want them. And, at the end of the day, you can't retain all your students but you want to have a handle on if a student is leaving, why. But I think starting from day one, I think you mentioned earlier, the orientation process and welcoming new families, I think is so important. And so we actually have a parent buddy program. And so not only for the students that they get a buddy, but also for the parents, I think is important to help them become part of our community. And what's the culture really like? And what are the opportunities for parents? And just those things that parents tend to get anxious about, I think hearing it directly from another parent just really helps alleviate some of that stress and anxiety. So from day one, we're really thinking about how can we really help our new families become part of the CHCH community. We also have a retention task force. It's a student life committee, and so it's made up of different program areas, including our grade level deans, our academic heads, our school nurse, our school counselors. I'm on that as well, just to be in the know. And we meet every other week just to talk about different program support systems we're putting in place, any students of concern. So that way, if there are any concerns, then we can put the right supports in place and address it as we're going through, rather than it just being an afterthought, and finding out about it when they're not returning their re-enrollment contract. One thing I think is especially important this year, with everything, I would love to have our head of school be more prominent in this process. We were joking before that, they hear and see me through the application process, and then sometimes they don't hear from me again until, end of January, February, when like, oh yeah, here's a re-enrollment contract, more paperwork signed, more money, right? Like, oh God, there's that girl again in admissions, like asking me, So I think, again, is more that we can get involved. I think many schools, the re-enrollment process does come from the admissions office, which I certainly understand, but I think I can't do this alone, right? And I think that what I learned early on in this job is that it's a team effort, right? The teachers and the program directors are the ones in it with the students, and they know exactly what's going on with each student. So I think having that open line of communication and being in the know is really helpful for me. That way I'm not caught off guard that I'm sending an email to someone and then getting like this 5-paragraph essay back of all these things that are wrong, right? I'm very much more aware and can approach it in a different way. But I think, for us, if we can have our head of school really just be more involved in the re-enrollment process and just kind of really just communicating the value of our programs and how much we appreciate having the families. We also do a lot of celebrations within our community of just teacher appreciation and just recognizing students. So I think that's important. Again, I think you really have to look at it as from the whole school year, even in the summer, how can you continue to make sure that everybody in your community is feeling valued and part of that and that they want to stay.
Yeah, absolutely. The retention, we call it a committee, but the task force essentially, they did a lot of these things. And, for the admissions department, it was enlightening because they have communication with families, and obviously multi-year families, habits will form, whether they're usually late, but they'll return, don't panic, kind of things like this. But those discussions, kind of more to your point, you weren't caught off guard when you emailed a family because you were talking to that dean or you were talking to the head, and the conversations that they have had, you were better prepared for. So, those are always good conversations to have. I loved when they were going on, that was where we could address, from the student life perspective, like, hey, the kids are wanting this, it's really not going to cost us much. It's really not going to be too much, but it's going to make a world of a difference for them. Let's do this. And, without those conversations, that can get lost. And you kind of put the kids, they're always first, but the little things that you can do in their lives to make the student experience that much greater doesn't get lost as easily when you have those kind of routine conversations happening with administrators. So that's really good to hear. I guess, we can turn more to the state of Massachusetts. I always like to hear, we had a guest, Kristen, on last week. She told us, Massachusetts a little bit in general from their perspective. From your perspective, what are you guys seeing? I would imagine it's something similar. It's not it's a diverse state, but not a huge state. But you might be facing similar things, maybe something unique in Waltham that you might not be seeing elsewhere. What is the state of Massachusetts for enrollment for you guys?
Yeah. I think it's interesting because, again, I think this is a big opportunity for independent schools, but also, as you know, I think many Catholic schools have gone under over the past few years too, just low enrollment and not being able to sustain that. And I know, just from experience with just kind of friends and where they're sending their kids, like those schools are waiting lists. They're full enrollment. They're back up to past where they were. So I think that's a good sign economically that those schools are also continuing to do well. But I think the point of that is that their families are recognizing that public schools, it's tough. It's large numbers. There's a lot of cuts. They're not able to do what independent schools are able to do and really getting to know their child. And so what I'm seeing, and just working with different educational consultants in the area, that families of younger children are now turning to independent schools. I know up in where where I live up in North Shore, Massachusetts, there's a lot of K through 8s. And I know they were really having challenging times with demographic dips and things like that. And their enrollments were not what they used to be, but I feel like now they're really recouping and recovering and really, showing the value added of what those K through 8s can provide for students. Therefore, we're hoping that more of those will continue on into the high schools for independent schools. So I'm really happy to hear that. But I think bottom line is that more and more families are turning to independent schools now for education, because just being fully remote or hybrid it's just not cutting it. They need that personal connection with their classmates, with their teachers. They need that direct instruction. And I think, again, I think this is a good opportunity for many of our schools to really market. And I hate to use that word because it's so businessy, but, at the end of the day, it is really getting the word out there about what us as schools can really provide these students and make sure that they're in an environment where they're really not falling behind, where they are reaching their potential and continue to have a love of school and they're not being disengaged. I think socially, I think that's just such a big piece. We've been talking so much about the academic part of this, but I think socially, kids are hurting. They're alone. They're not interacting with one another. They're no longer able to play their sports or, have those outlets of those things that they are good at and that they love. So I think it's important to not only look at the academic piece, but also how students might be struggling socially and emotionally as well. And so this is something that we're able to provide for those students too, is an environment where they're able to continue to be around their friends. Of course, it looks different, right? They have to distance, they're wearing masks, they're spread out, smaller groups, but I think that's an important part of this as well. But I think here in Massachusetts, that's what we're seeing, especially from the bigger public schools.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think in general, our generation and the generation of parents that independent schools are communicating to, I think the emotional well-being of their child is taken into a larger consideration when selecting a school versus just say the academics. I think academics will always be a large component. Of course, it's school, but I think they're looking for institutions that provide that more emotional balance, or also the ability for an environment that allows their child to be successful, whether that's striving in academics, whether it's the arts, whether it's athletics. Yep. And so I think, schools that are quicker to the switch on approaching this new generation is going to be able to easily navigate it a lot better than, say, schools that are just stuck in tradition and don't want to truly move off of that. And so I looking through a lot of data that Jesse and I have with working with a lot of clients, we find that how is this generation, the latter part of the Gen Xers, the millennials, and even Gen Z, to your point, how are they making decisions? How are they looking at their child's education? And I think this generation is geared more to preparing their child for how the world really is versus how they want it to be. And exactly. I think that's a different mindset.
100%. Yeah, no, I agree. I think, just educating the whole child, I think is really important. Something that we haven't always paid attention to, but I think, again, being at CHCH for so long has really taught me that, I went to public school myself, and you didn't have all of those other parts of growing up and just becoming who you are and just having different passions and being able to put yourself out there and really, being able to experience and enjoy school to the fullest, and that it's okay, right? If you fail at something, that there'll be adults there in your life to help pick you up and keep pushing you. But I think, there's so much that our teenagers are facing, not only with COVID, but even before this with social media and just dealing with the social landscape and such. It's so stressful, and just the competitive nature of college applications and things like that. There's so much anxiety and stress out there. And I think, having schools like ours, just to be able to go through 4 years of high school and enjoy it and kind of you're still going to have pressures and those challenges, but it's just, a different type of environment where you can feel safe kind of going through those motions and really being self-aware, right? And really understanding who you are as not only as a learner, but as a person in this world as well, I think is super important.
I think we all, I mean, all personally, we could probably agree on this call that we look back in our life and been like, I wish I'd enjoyed those years a little bit more than I did.
Yeah.
And so why treat, children or students any different? Like there has to be a component of like, enjoy this experience, enjoy the friendships you're making. These are years you're never going to get back. And because a lot of times we look back fondly on years that we wish we had just, took a little bit more time to be in the moment versus you gotta, make sure you're doing the right things to get noticed by college. And once you get to college, you got to make sure you're doing the right things to be noticed to get into that grad school that you want to go to. And it's always looking 3 or 4 years down the road. And it's not always, not enjoying the moment. And before you realize it, you're retired, you look around, you're like, well, where did this all go? Right.
Right.
Well, it's definitely probably the most underrated part of independent schools, especially a small school, is that environment. Like no one thinks about it. They take for granted, as a student, all of my friends. And, I remember when the pandemic started in March and we had a big assembly for the boarders because we were going to, announce that, take stuff home with you for spring break. We're not coming back until things get started. And everyone was cheering and, because kids are kids and they're like, no school, blah, blah, blah. And, I remember the headmaster cut him off and said, listen, you guys are going to miss each other. And we have no idea if we're going to be back. And this is going to be right now it seems fun. But the relationships that are sitting right next to you is going to form a lot of bonds for the rest of your life. Myself and Chris met in boarding school, and it was a big ordeal going back to campus every year. I can't even imagine what kids were like, when they weren't coming back for the fall. It's like if Hogwarts closed and all the kids couldn't go back, and everyone's like, oh my God, what are we going to do? All my friends, we got to meet virtually. So, but that environment piece, the safety to be, who you are, just the goals and the acceptance across the board, especially with, schools that really focus on the diversity pieces, the equity pieces. It's second nature. And that's not always available, especially in a public school. And it's really not their fault. It's just the nature of the beast. But that's a big addition that you guys are it's really starting to show. That independent schools, especially smaller ones with competitive areas, with good public schools around, they can draw on those kind of value systems.
And I always find that the most difficult for, enrollment and admissions professionals is how do you communicate that type of culture to, to people or a generation that don't have any kind of experience with independent school. All they've got is their public school experience. And there's a whole different component that, Jesse just talked about is like, how do you communicate that? Like that is something you don't really fully understand until you're part of the culture. And I think that is where, the schools that kind of really know themselves and are tapped into it, the retention comes. Because once you get involved in that community, in that school, then it becomes almost like a way of thinking in life, and that they become family, and I think that that's a crucial part to retention, to come back to where we started on this, and so I think that is definitely a leg up that, that independent schools have. And plus you kind of get this kind of loyalty to the institution that you see in colleges, but not public schools. Right. And that goes on to where, I cut my teeth in development and advancement. And so, so that's kind of the specialty too, is like, when Jesse and I talk about our high school, sometimes with friends that didn't go to school with us, they would comment like, you talk about this high school like it was your college. And it was like, well, in a lot of ways, we lived there for 4 years. It has a, for me, I get back to my high school more than I get back to my university. And so, I mean, that right there is a statement alone.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's what's kept me at this school for so long, is just seeing the transformations and the growth. And, and now these, when I first started, these kids, they're not kids, they're adults now, right? And their jobs, they have families of their own. It's so cool just to kind of see, from when they were 13 years old and now when they're like 30, it's just crazy to see how much they've been able to grow, but they got that foundation at CHCH, and that was kind of the turning point for their life, right? And they talk about that a lot. And I think that's how you communicate a lot of that, is through storytelling and people's experiences. But for me, I can speak to that, right? When I'm meeting with families and just seeing kind of all these students who have gone through CHCH and just kind of coming out just like a completely different person, and just have really just discovered new things that they love. They might have been such an introvert, and they were in an environment where they could just be comfortable and just put themselves out there and try new things. To me, that's an experience that you just can't replace. And seeing, that like, oh, my, I remember this one girl I'm still in touch with, but she said, oh, my roommate from Taiwan came to visit me a few years ago in New York City when my first, when my son was born. It was just so special that we had this bond since ninth grade, so just to kind of see those friendships and relationships solidified, and they're still kept in touch. It's just so special that, how awesome being in a job, right? That's just, you get to see those things happen. It's really gratifying, just to see that there are schools out there that these kids can grow and just feel comfortable with themselves and just go off to do amazing things. And they might not have had that path had they not come and experienced our schools. So I agree. And you guys are lucky that you got to experience that in high school, and see how cool your friendship is from that. So, yeah. Yeah.
If you had known Jesse back then, I mean, independent schools did a wonder for him.
Only imagine.
Well, we always like to leave on a positive. So I asked one more question, and it's going to be the high note. For you and your perspective, where do you see the biggest opportunity for enrollment coming up this year?
Yeah, I just think, again, I think all these things we just talked about, right? Just kind of the value added of our schools, right? How can we really continue to differentiate ourselves and just market to all these kids out there struggling with remote learning and just not getting that social outlet? I think it's just such a good opportunity for independent schools to really get themselves out there again. You got to think outside the box and think of unique ways to tap into these families. But I think the word of mouth marketing is going to be huge. It's all about the experiences and using your families and your students to help you in the recruitment process. It's just look at the basics, but really turn the basics into something cool and unique. You don't have to do 100 different things, maybe just one or two, just to stand out. But I think it's just really important to, it's going to pay off. I do think so.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Lisa, thank you so much for taking the time today. I know you've got a busy schedule and you've got mid-year enrollments to take care of. Chris, thank you as always. I really appreciate all the content, great insights, and love the innovative ways that you guys are tackling, your open houses, your tours, and obviously the international market. So, and retention. Thank you so much.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you for having me. Really had fun. Thanks,
okay,
guys.
Bye. See you later. Well, that'll do it for us this week. I hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back same time next week. Thank you very much. Have a good week.